My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, a podcast where I, your host, try to give you some tips on how you can explain all this weird, wild, crazy conspiracy stuff to the people you love most. Because that's what I've been trying to do for the past 10 years with no success.
I've been telling everybody that our government is shady, but every time I do, my family thinks I'm crazy. The hollow earth, UFOs, aliens invading, fluoride in the water, they spray our skies daily. When I talk about these things, they think I'm crazy. There's no escaping anymore the evil that we're facing. Illuminati mind control, they're sacrificing babies. The end of days, but anyways, my family thinks I'm crazy.
What, they don't want to listen to you?
No, they don't want to listen. They don't want to hear it. They're just like, oh, here we go, Mark. Off again with your...
Mark being Mark again.
Yeah. So, that's the thing about podcasts is when you're on the air, and it's like therapy, If I can't talk to my family about this stuff, I'll talk to you, Matt, and all our listeners.
You'll just tell your whole podcast.
Yeah. So who are we talking about today, Matt?
They think that I'm crazy. They really think that I'm crazy. They really think that I'm crazy. My family thinks that I'm crazy.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. Today on the show, we have someone who is a returning guest, although it was on a different format. I last spoke to him here on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy RSS feed, and he's returning to discuss not only his great authorship, publishing a book about the Lucifer mystery, but we're also going to get into some of the really compelling documentaries that he has on his YouTube channel. So without further ado, Eddie, can you please introduce yourself for our audience and tell us a little bit about yourself?
What up? Thank you for having me here. Namaste. I'm Esoteric Eddie. I've been researching the esoteric, occult, conspiratorial for well over 10 years now. Got into it at an early age, mostly because it's just all these random revelations that I had throughout my life. My whole life is kind of revolved around the esoteric. Had certain instances or came across certain pieces of information and knowledge all throughout my childhood, early teen years that kind of led me on this path. And more recently, within the past couple years, almost a few years now, I've been taking this really serious now, launching my documentary channel and also getting back into my writings, publishing a book last year and getting ready to publish another one this year as well.
Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Are you willing to disclose what it's about?
Yeah. I've mentioned it before on other podcasts. It's actually my first book getting re-edited. So it's technically my second book, but it's actually my first book. I released my first book back in 2018 when I was like 23 years old. And it was just horrible, to be honest. It was I was too eager. It wasn't professionally written. It was not professionally edited either. But I'm going through a painstaking, revisions right now. But it's awesome. I'm actually having a good time, like diving into the research and just adding so much more dense information. And I'm gonna also get it professionally edited, just like I did my last one. But it's titled "The Anunnaki Theorem." It started off as kind of like a brief rundown of what the Anunnaki theory is, kind of just like a pickup reader for somebody who's never heard of it before, to kind of as an introductory type of piece. But my views have changed on the Anunnaki and Sitchin's work and stuff like that since I dropped that book. So I'm like finding myself revising like the whole premise of the book now. And it's still going to be titled The Anunnaki Theorem and center around that, but it's more or less a comparative theology piece now.
Right on, man. And kudos to you for recognizing that, hey, this needs some work. I better go and take a whack at it. That's awesome, man. I appreciate that. And I think that subject deserves more of a spotlight on it. I recently had a conversation with Freddie Silva, and he pieces the Anunnaki story in with the history of Armenia, which I'm sure you might be familiar with that, given you're researching it as well. But I found that fascinating that there's this whole, political reasons why you don't generally get this information? You know, people don't consider that often, that, you know, the places that we are finding these amazing megalithic structures, or places that have such potent history, you know, unfortunately are sometimes in places that aren't accessible by, you know, typical researchers, just because of the political whatever that's going on. I mean, there's a lot of wars that go on in that area. It makes it difficult to know, you know, whether or not you're going to be safe going over there to discover this kind of stuff. But wow, man, this is fascinating. You mentioned having a couple of sort of symbolic occurrences when you're a kid, certain information as you were growing up that popped out at you. We're the same age. I think you're born in 94 as well, right?
Yeah,
Right
yeah.
on. So
94.
I think there's some kind of indigo child energy going on with us right now. So I'm really excited to dive into that a little bit. But what were some of those childhood experiences? Do you remember any that were significant to retell?
Yeah, man. There's a bunch. And one of them that I kind of mention a lot because it was impactful to me was I remember being in first grade and going to the library as we would like every week or so to pick out a new book. And I've always loved history, which is like you know, which shows me that this was kind of my path. I've always loved history, among other things. But I remember picking out this one book that spoke about knights and dragons and dinosaurs and stuff like that. It was a weird mix, but I remember there was like a chapter in that book about knights fighting dragons and also looking for the Holy Grail. And I didn't know what any of that stuff was in first grade, but it was like fascinating, right? Like every young boy likes knights and dragons or whatever. But I remember reading about the knights and the Holy Grail, and it just made an impression on me. And I didn't know what that was until later on when I found it again in my life. And I found, you know, the Freemasons and the Knights Templars, and that the Holy Grail could be, you know, the bloodline of Jesus or the Ark of the Covenant. But it's just something like that, you know. And I've also had like just strange things, like paranormal things happen to me. Another thing that I mentioned a bunch, but that was also important to this path was, you know, my grandpa telling me at the age of 8 years old that he had seen a UFO, and which was very shocking for me because I grew up in a Christian and Catholic family, and my grandpa was a pastor. So for him to tell me that he saw a UFO and that he believed in aliens was like very shocking for me at 8 years old. But and I just recently released a live on my YouTube channel about another incident that I haven't really mentioned on podcasts before. But I remember being again around 7 or 8 years old, and I was at summer camp, and there was this summer camp supervisor who, for whatever reason, decided it was cool or a good idea to talk to me about the New World Order. And I don't remember how we got into the conversation. I just remember we started talking about the Bible and the book of Revelation. And then he told me about the New World Order and the number of the beast and all this stuff and the mark of the beast, and warned me about that when I was like 7 or 8 years old, warned me about the attempt that was going to be had by these elites. So just all my life, I just had these weird little pieces of knowledge and warnings and shocking moments when it came to the esoteric, the occult, conspiratorial. I mean, I could tell you endless stories, but, you know, I don't want to take up all the time on that, you know, unless you want to hear more. But just as an example, just stuff like that just always kept me going down this path.
Hmm. Yeah, no, you're bringing up memories for me too. I mean, there was one like bumper sticker that somebody put on this telephone pole in this neighborhood that I would always go through, and it said "Research the New World Order" in big, like bold white letters over a black sticker. And I'm like, whoa, what is that? You know, and I go home and I'm
Yeah.
like searching around, and I'm like 14, 13. I'm hearing rappers kind of mention stuff like this in certain rap songs. And yeah, it was a big, big, you know, seed that was planted. And it happens to, I think, people that listen to these types of podcasts in some way, you know, like however you find podcasts, there's usually like a story that goes with it. But yeah, we've talked a little bit about this the last time we got together when we went on the Illuminati Confirmed podcast. And I did notice you put some live streams on there. You're talking about an astral projection experience. You also have another video about could AI be, a part of this new world order scheme, which I'm with you there. I think the answer is pretty obvious, but we can maybe get into that later on, because I feel like there's a sort of deeper connection that you have to one particular documentary that you put out recently. And it connects to Mexico, which I understand you share heritage in Mexico. So I would love to learn about that, and when you first became interested in going back and learning about, your cultural history, your heritage, and like who, your ancestors are. I think that's tremendously important.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, man, it's an interesting thing because growing up, as a Mexican kid, I guess, right? Like I just always viewed myself as Mexican. When people ask me, what are you? Oh, I'm Mexican, right? But of course, I'm American first. I mean, I never really like thought in those terms growing up, right? Like it was, especially when we were kids, we didn't think about identity politics. I mean, that's huge now. It's like taught in schools, but when we were kids, I mean, that was non-existent. So I didn't think in that manner. I just viewed myself as a kid, as an American person here in California, or when I was living in California. But I also I knew that I was Mexican, and I had pride in that. My family members were Mexican and all that. But it wasn't until later on when I took a college course, where it really dawned on me that I wasn't just this simple idea of Mexican, because what I now know is that, first and foremost, the word Mexican is an indigenous word to that land, and it comes from the word machica, which means the anointed. And so it's a general word for all of the people of that land. And in pre-Columbian times or pre-colonial times, there were different ethnic groups throughout Mexico, and they all had their own culture, their own pride, and some ethnic differences, but they were all Mexica. And well, of course, the Spaniards came and they did their thing, and we mixed eventually, and we created a new ethnic line of people, which would be known as different things. Now we have Latinx and all these different identities for them, Hispanic. So growing up, I was always like, oh, I'm Mexican. But now I have this more kind of complex view of myself. I'm not Mexican, because a true Mexican is an indigenous person to that land. And the features that I have, and most, modern Mexicans, are a mix of the Spaniards and the Mexican. And so I probably have more Spaniard in me than I do Mexican. And it was kind of a bittersweet thing to find out, because all my life I had pride with Mexico and the Aztecs and the Mayans and this and that, and the pyramids. But come to find, I'm a mutt for one, but I'm probably more so Spaniard than anything. And but it's fine though, it's all good
No,
because
and as most of us are, brother. I mean, Mexico is a colony, just like where I live in New England's a colony, and I'm a mutt too. I mean, I could sit here and probably list on both hands what my, connections are to various countries through my ancestors. So yeah, there's no shame in that. I think there's a very interesting story that's playing out. And it's unfortunate that the social justice warriors kind of paint this weird light on it, but I think they've kind of made the idea of cultural synthesis a bad thing, when I think there's a good way to do that. There's a way to bring out the best in both cultures and fuse them together. We have plenty of examples of that with countries that were just trading with each other and not, colonizing one another. It is a sad and tragic story when we get into the finer details of what happened to the Native Americans, not just in Mexico, but all the way far as north as Canada, and even, I'm sure, all the way down south to Chile. So yeah, man, I think it's so much more complicated than like, oh, I have this much blood, or, like I've always felt a very strong resonance with the Native American cultures. And I chalk that up to being born in a place where there were more Native Americans here. If you look at the grand scheme of time, the people who I share blood with have only been here for 400 years. So the land has more resonant energy with the Native American culture, to my logic. So yeah, I think that we're both in resonance there, man.
Yeah, yeah. It was weird at first, but then I mean now it's fine. Like I said, I don't view myself in those ways. I'm Eddie.
Right.
And I'm Eddie, and I love Mexico. I love America. I love the world. But yeah, I have heritage connected to Mexico because of my family members. But one thing that stuck out to me that I've never mentioned before, because it's a little weird, I found out through that college course that I was taking, and this was all by incident too. I'm sitting there, as I like to say, admittedly on the good old cannabis, taking my course, just eating. It was an online course. I was eating in my house, watching this video our professor had us watching, and I found out where my last name comes from, and it's a pretty fascinating story. So my last name is Kano, or also it's pronounced Cano, and I always thought it was an indigenous name, Cano, because you have Mexicano and stuff like that. But Cano basically is like I don't know what you would call that in language arts. It's like a suffix, right? Like a Mexicano is somebody who's Mexican, or you can say like a whatever, right? So, but I found out, right? So right at the crux when the Aztecs lost the war and eventually, were defeated and had to give up. Apparently, Moctezuma, the last Aztec king, his dying wish was for the new colonizers to take care of his daughter and allow his daughter to assimilate and be a part of the new kingdom. And they took care of her. I forgot what her actual Aztec name was, but she's remembered as Doña Isabel, or Madam Isabel. And she helped the colonizers, because to me it's actually a romantic tale, really. There's a lot of blood and craziness, but it's actually a very romantic tale, poetically speaking. So Doña Isabel actually helped the colonizers assimilate, the indigenous into this new world, into this new civilization that was unfolding. And the Mexicans loved her and the Spaniards loved her. So she was this mother figure who helped usher in this new world. And she had a total of 5 husbands throughout her life. And the first 4 all mysteriously died, or died in mysterious ways. And she had some children with some of them, I believe. But it was her 5th husband who ended up outliving the rest of them, but ended up dying before her also, I think. It was her 5th husband who she had her multitude of her children with. And this 5th husband was a royal from Spain by the name of, I don't know if I'm getting the first name right, but his name was, I think it was Juan Cano. So Doña Isabel, the last heiress to the Aztec kingdom, had a husband and children with this husband who was a Spaniard royal by the name of Juan Cano, my last name. And as far as I can tell, he was the first Cano, if not at least the first royal Cano in Mexico who had kids with the last heiress of the Aztec Empire. And I was freaking out. Again, I'm sitting here learning this just out of the blue. I spit my food out. I'm like freaking out. I'm like, whoa, what the heck? And so I go on this little tangent to try to like trace my bloodline or my lineage to this person. And what I found was so when my dad was born, my grandpa was already 50. So we have a pretty far reaching ancestry, even with my grandpa. And so what I found, though, all that I could find was that there's about 200 years between where my family ends, as far as I know, and where Doña Isabel's family broke off into other last names. So there's about 200 years of research that I would need to like dig into to maybe possibly be able to tie my Canos into her Canos.
Yeah, and that could be just 3 people in that 200-year span. I mean, if you think about it, the way people's lifespan, especially, if I'm understanding correctly, people live for pretty long lifetimes in that part of the world. Obviously, there's the whole disease conversation when the Spaniards come, but this settlement was very advanced. This civilization was very advanced, and if I'm correct, the people that were part of the, and I want to ask you this to please clarify later on, because I know I'll probably use the wrong terms at some point, but you know, they were living very long lifespans. Now, to clarify, we have several different periods of time in Central American history prior to the Spaniards, right? So the oldest that we can determine would be the Olmecs. Then, and this is where I'm fuzzy, so correct me if I'm wrong. Then it seems there's another culture that is called the Tula or the Toltec, and then there's a couple different cultures that precede or follow them, Aztec, the Mayans, and then right around the end of the, let's say, pre-Columbian period or pre-Spaniard period, you have like basically the Aztecs at the end of what we could say a decline period. Like they weren't doing good up until when the Spaniards came. Am I correct on the time frame there? Or
Yeah, pretty much.
awesome.
Yeah, there's the Olmecs, and then a couple others like Zapotecs and the Mixtec, and then the Toltec, and then the Mayas and the Aztecs. And the Toltecs are pretty much, I guess, in my view, regarded as like the last who were spiritual before things started to get like all weird and mixed up.
Okay, so we can connect the Canos to 200 years before this royal guy gets in there. I mean, this is what these stories are made of, man. I mean, I could see, a really cool book being written by yourself that starts with this as like the forward or the first chapter. It reminds me of other researchers. There's this sort of theme with researchers like yourself where strange things happen in their childhood and even in their, genetic lineage that predispose them to this type of research. I haven't done much of my own looking into my own genealogy, but yeah, that's fascinating, man. It's definitely something that could give you that fuel to keep going, at the at the low points. But let's get into the finer details here, because I understand that there's a really interesting theory that you have about Mexico and why we, see what we see there today with the cartels and this like really what seems from the outside like an unstable infrastructure. Now, this is an outsider's perspective, so I could be wrong, but it seems like there's a very strange occult atmosphere there as well. And it could be because Mexico's been cursed. Is that correct?
Yeah, man. It's kind of just a theory or an opinion that I've kind of developed over the years. And for those who don't know, Mexico is riddled with occultism, primarily because of this cults or religion by the name of Santa Muerte, which translates to the Saint of Death. And it's very common there for people to believe in this patron saint of death, who was kind of like a good luck figure in Mexico, and kind of relates to the Day of the Dead thing, but not really. Like we have a comfortability in Mexico with death. That's why we celebrate our dead ones during the Day of the Dead, and we're okay with morbid or dark imagery. That's always been a part of our culture. I mean, you can see even in Aztec and Mayan artwork, you'll see skeletons and stuff like that. So we, as a people, we're just comfortable with death and the imagery of it. But there is a religion, and I'm not an expert, not to be honest, I haven't even studied it that much, probably should, but I don't even know the history behind Santa Muerte. But all I know is it's very prevalent, and I've heard stories and I've heard documentaries about it, and I've met people in my personal life, and I know people back home that partake in it. But it's just a strange thing, man. It's a strange thing. And there's an altar that kind of looks like the Virgin Mary, but it's a skeleton. That is like the more common one that people pray to, among the many other weird voodoo and occult type things that we do over there. And the weird thing is that all the cartels, or most of the cartels in Mexico, believe in this religion. that's kind of the default religion of the cartels over there, is Santa Muerte, because they partake in killing every day, you know, if it's not through actual killing or through the selling of lethal drugs and all these type of things. And I don't know if most people know, if you people know this or not, but for those who don't, um, there was a shift in what we call corrido music, kind of like, you know, the typical Mexican music that you'll hear at like birthday parties or whatever, right? Like with the accordion and whatever, like the Mexican ranch music, corridos and stuff like that. There was a shift in that music. I'd say when I noticed it, it was like around 2010, where it kind of similar to like a rap. Corridos artists started to like sing about cartels, and to this day it's very famous now. It's kind of taken over the spheres in a similar way where like over here in America, trap music has kind of taken over the airwaves, and we just love trap music, and it's all about yeah, again, just murder, sex, and drugs. There's artists that have taken over the corrido sound or the Mexican, you know, folk music, and instead of singing about love and heartache and the things you know, your family and the land and stuff like that, it's now just all about killing and sex and drugs. And the young people love it. And when I was in high school, you know, having Mexican friends, they loved it. You know, that was their shit, you know. And but I always thought it was kind of honestly just kind of sad to see, you know, because it was just driving us further and further into this madness of glorifying cartel culture. And so our land, right, Mexico, is just full of this occult vibe, of this cartel vibe. And what makes it worse too is that the young people out there see it as a benefit to work for the cartel, in the same way that like when Pablo Escobar was around, he was you know, giving back to the communities, so they loved him, they saw him as a good figure. It's just one of those tough things, man, where it's like what's good, what's bad, you know, what's evil. It's all a thin line.
Well, and that's like the mafiosos and the, you know, in the immigrant culture in the East Coast, you know, it's like they took care of the neighborhood. They didn't go and murder people in their own neighborhood. They took care of the people in their neighborhood, so they didn't have any rats. They didn't have any snitches going and telling people what they saw, you know, the mafiosos and all these gentlemen doing. You know, I think that's a part of it too. Like you see that with the East Coast rap culture kind of taking on that persona of but Mafia Don and all that stuff. Absolutely, man. I mean, I give a lot of credit to underground rap music for sort of helping me wake up, you know, rappers like Immortal Technique and Cannabis and on and on and on. There's so many examples, but they talk about that too, and how there's like this perpetual violence that is emotionally established in people's minds through this music, man. And yeah, I don't speak Spanish, so I have never, you know, really observed that, you know, firsthand, but hearing you describe it, it definitely rhymes with what we see in, you know, and I'm sure you know this, you live in the States, with what we see in the urban areas, you know, where people are glorifying this culture that if you look at it from an outside perspective, it might be like, wow, that doesn't make any sense. I can understand how it's empowering to some degree when that's all you know. But from the further outside perspective, you realize like, wow, this is contributing to the majority of the problems, this drug trafficking, sickness. And it's not Mexico's fault, you know, it's not Mexico's fault at all. It's the, you know, system that's been set up to funnel drugs from those places to this country where there's so much wealth that it creates this, you know, economy, this black market economy, you know, and it's not only bad for Mexico, but it's terrible for us in the US.
Yeah, man, it's just we live in weapon world, you
Mm.
know. We live in weapon world, and I mean, it's just I don't know.
Well,
It's just
and we maybe want to take it back a little bit because it is, yeah, it's a little bit of a rough topic to get into, but maybe we can go and approach it from the historical context and get into this, you know, evil sorcerer character. Or maybe I'm
yeah,
mischaracterizing him, but he maybe is responsible for this curse somehow, or at least the obsession with the occult and death?
Yeah, man. Okay, so quick background about like Aztec and Mayan history. So when the Spaniards came, they pretty much burned like 98% of the remaining books of the Aztec and Mayans and destroyed just a whole bunch of artifacts. And it's in a churn of in a churn of unfortunate events, the same people who burned all of those books actually ended up being the ones who also luckily wrote down a lot of notes on what the Aztec and Mayan customs and beliefs were. And those translations are like pretty much the remaining pieces of information we have on the Aztec and Mayans. We have, I think, like maybe a handful of like genuine Aztec codexes, but the rest are all these like translations from colonial writers who weren't all bad. Some of them, like the Florentine Codex, was actually put together by one of the Spaniards and a lot of the indigenous people. He basically employed them to tell him their stories and their beliefs, and actually had them illustrate them too. So they
Yeah.
helped
I've
put that
seen
together.
these. Yeah, man, I've seen these, and I'll share a link to some of the images in the episode description. Me and my buddy Michael Wan, who is researching the Susquehanna River in Pennsylvania, he's made a lot of connections between some petroglyphs in the Susquehanna River to possibly Mayan and Aztec culture, which is very interesting. But we did a whole episode on those codexes, and yeah, it was fascinating, man. The detail, the artistry that went into that, you see that, and then you look at the explanations that they give us for what these people were like. They say they were Indians, they didn't have any culture, all this derogatory stuff. How do you explain how like they made that? Like, it's so beautiful.
Yeah.
And like apparently they never had tools like that to create art before the Spanish came, so they were just naturals. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. So among all of those stories emerges the story of Tezcatlipoca, which was this evil wizard, as I've coined him. And
Does
the
that
document,
Does that, sorry to interrupt you again, but does that word mean hummingbird? Am I right about that? Is there something about a hummingbird that fits into this, or am I taking another story and shoehorning it in?
yeah, you're thinking about he has a hard name to pronounce, but I think it's like Huitzilopochtli. It's with an H though. That's
Okay,
a
different
different
then.
god.
Okay.
Tezcatlipoca roughly translates to smoking mirror. And he's a trickster god. He's this sorcerer god who would carry around a mirror with him, which kind of is like a symbol for his deception, his magic like abilities, because he would do all these weird little magic tricks and stuff. So that was his name, Smoking Mirror. But the book that I got this information from, that I made the documentary from, is a book known as The Gospel of the Toltecs, by Frank Diaz. I read that years ago when I was like taking this college course and getting back into my roots a little bit, and it fascinated me. And Diaz's book is a culmination of, or an amalgamation of, all these different stories and fragments from all the lost knowledge put together. So he put all these different fragments together and gave us the chronological order of Tezcatlipoca's story. And it's a fascinating story. So, like we mentioned, we had the Olmecs and then a couple other cultures, and then the Toltecs. And then after the Toltecs, it was basically the Mayan and the Aztecs, and then the decline. The Olmecs are a mystery to this day. They actually set the foreground for what would be the rest of the Mexican culture and art style and spiritual belief system. And then after them started coming these other people. But the kingdom in question here is the Toltec. So the Toltec so Frank Diaz's story starts with this guy by the name of Human the Elder. And again, these are all, what I'm telling you are real stories being told to us from Mayan and Toltec people. So that these are actual legendary tales. It'd be like opening up the Bible. in a way. So in this story, it starts with Human the Elder saying a prophecy, and Human the Elder is giving this prophecy right around 33 BC. And Human says that he has been alive for about 300 years, and he has seen his Toltec people from inception to that point in time. And Human the Elder says that there will come a day where this king will rise, and he will be a great king, and he will face trouble and strife, and he will lose the kingdom, and he will find defeat, and the kingdom will fall to that enemy. But that king will carry on as a spiritual leader, forever to be remembered as that spiritual leader who helped revive a spirit in Mexico as this new age was dawning before he left mysteriously. So that's Human the Elder's prophecy. And then Diaz kicks into the story at full speed. And I'll just kind of summarize it. But the story is about a legendary leader who, kind of like Christ, there is some pseudo information on. There's not much real evidence for his existence, but there are stories about him, like the apostles and their gospels. And this king, his Toltec name was Quetzalcoatl, which means one reed, because they would name their children based on the day or the year that they were born in. So he was born in one reed. So we can just call him one reed, or reed for short. And so one reed was born, and his dad was the king of the Toltec kingdom, but his dad was murdered by his uncles, and then his uncles tried to dispose of him, but they were unsuccessful. And the tales kind of tell this like symbolic tale of them trying to kill him like 5 or 7 different ways, and they're all like symbolic. Like one of them's like throwing him into like a pit of ants, and the ants actually carry him to like safety. So they're all like these symbolic like deaths, or attempts at deaths. And eventually he's thrown in a river, and the uncles think, all right, we've done it, he's got to drown, he's a baby. But he actually just floats down the river, and this like elderly couple finds him and then brings him in and takes him under their wing. And when he's old enough, they tell him, who he really is, and tell him about his dad. And so he gets this courage instilled in him, and eventually he goes back and he kills his uncles and he takes over the kingdom. But before he's initiated into being the king, he goes into education under the priesthood, under the Toltec priesthood. And he goes into meditation for a number of years, from the age of 27 to about 30 or 33. And then after he comes out of that meditation and monkhood, pretty much, he's ready to be a king. So he becomes a king, and he rules, and the kingdom flourishes under him. Everybody loves him. He gives awards to those who are crafty and who are hard workers, and it's just flourishing. Everybody loves it. They're having a great time. And then out of nowhere, becomes this weird sorcerer. Starting off in the forest, he comes into the kingdom through the forest, and he's known as a shapeshifter. And he first appears as an old man to this bystander who's gathering firewood, and he just appears as this crippled old guy. And he walks up to him and he says, "Hey, I'm looking for one reed." And he says, "Well, that's my king," And he's like, and the old man says, "I need to speak to him." And he says, "Well, that's the king. You can't just speak to the king." And he says, and then the old man picks up a dead flower, or the sorcerer picks up a dead flower and turns it back to life and says, "Here, give him this and tell him that I need to speak to him." And this spooks out the guy, and he runs away and tells his king what had happened. And his king goes to see him, goes to the forest to find this weird old man. And when he goes there, he finds the old man, but the old man is delirious and kind of dazed, and doesn't know what he's talking about. He's like, "I don't know. I didn't ask for you." So it's this weird, like, what's the word? It's like foreshadowing, what's to come. And Tezcatlipoca is playing mind games. He starts to sow, the thoughts of doubt and fear and anxiety in one reed from then. And the story goes on, and there's all these just strange trials and tribulations that Tezcatlipoca puts on to Quetzalcoatl, or one reed. And slowly but surely, he breaks down one reed's spiritual guard, and also the spiritual guard of the people, starting with sex. And Tezcatlipoca enters the kingdom disguised as a whore with a couple other whores and tries to instigate, One Reed into having sex with them. And One Reed, he's a spiritual guy. One Reed is always paying. And an interesting thing about the story is no matter what happens, no matter what obstacle Tezcatlipoca puts in front of One Reed, he always resorts to meditation, which I think is was said in purpose. It's purposeful. It's kind of a symbol to the power of meditation. But One Reed refuses because he's a celibate monk and he's spiritual. But some of the townspeople see these horrors coming in and out of the temple, the royal temple, and they start to think that there's prostitution going on. So they start to get envious, and some of them start to partake into prostitution. And then some of the priests start to take into prostitution. And then some of the women of the kingdom start to get jealous. And so they start to kind of throw themselves out there promiscuously. So it starts with sex. So Tezcatlipoca breaks everybody's morality down with sex. And then he starts to do a couple other things. And eventually he starts to kind of like rally the people against the kingdom, against the empire, and show that the empire is weak. And there's this one scene in the story that's pretty maddening where Tezcatlipoca takes like hundreds of people and gives them like a mushroom tea or something, and they're all just dazed out of their mind, tripping out. And he's playing drums and flutes and marching them through the forest, saying, F this kingdom, let's leave. And he actually leads these hundreds of people who are tripping on shrooms and, basically at a rave with all these drums and stuff playing super loud and fast. And he leads them off a cliff, just letting hundreds of people fall off this cliff and die. And it says in the story that, some of them are trying to, come back up. Some of the survivors are trying to climb up, and he just bashes them in the head. So he's just this maniacal guy who just keeps instigating things behind the scenes. And eventually, he just tears down it all. He just tears it all down, and all these weird bad omens start to show up, and the people think that like there's famine, there's droughts, and there's these strange omens, and Tezcatlipoca gets the people to believe that all of this is happening because of One Reed, and that it's One Reed's fault. So the people, but right before the last act that he does is that he convinces the people, Tezcatlipoca convinces the people that in order to end all this famine and destruction and craziness that's been going on, is that they need to go to the neighboring kingdom and sacrifice the king's daughter. And the people, they're like okay with it, they're like, yeah, if that's what it takes, so they take the neighboring king's daughter, and they sacrifice her in front of the city. And then from there, all hell breaks loose. And now human sacrifice is introduced to the kingdom and to Mexico for the first time, according to these legends. And it just gets crazy. I mean, there's parts of the story where one of Tezcatlipoca's servants kills an old lady, skins her face, and then wears it and runs around the city. And then people start believing that if you sacrifice one another or oneself, that will bring, abundance to the land. So all this is going on. And while this is all going on, One Reed is just trying to meditate, keep his cool, keep his calm, but the people turn against him. And then he basically gets driven out of the kingdom. And as he leaves the kingdom with his last band of followers who are still loyal to him, and as he leaves, he tells them to abandon their riches, abandon everything that they knew and that they own, and that the Toltec kingdom is no more. But I'll take a break from there if you want to chime in or have any questions.
Yeah, and I'm sorry. Go ahead and take a drink of water. I didn't mean to leave you hanging there, but when you got into the point about the smoky mirror, my mind started going, and I started connecting some dots. And I'm sure you've possibly thought of this before, but I just wanted to double check to make sure the dates would even line up. But John Dee had an obsidian mirror, and I'm wondering, is it possible that there was some sort of, trickster entity that was operating through this smoky mirror, or this mirror that this guy had, and maybe that not the same mirror, but that same quality, because it was also obsidian. I don't know, maybe it wasn't obsidian. You didn't say that. I'm just adding that in. But John Dee certainly had an obsidian mirror, and they say there's no story as to how he got that particularly. He says that an angel Uriel gave it to him, but I mean, if the Spanish were already in the New World by the time John Dee was alive, then it's most likely probable that he got it from somebody who came back.
Yeah. I think the Toltec Empire must have been like in around 300 AD, if I'm correct. But what's fascinating though is obsidian is native or natural in Mexico,
Right.
and most of the daggers and knives were made out of obsidian. I actually just went to Mexico recently, and they were showing us some like cool obsidian artifacts. But yeah, no, obsidian is like was highly regarded in ancient Mexico. So there could be a connection there. There could be a weird trickster spirit.
Well,
You
yeah,
know?
and I mean, I have a lot of crystals. I don't think that any of them possess some kind of spirit inside of them, but they're also, you know, fairly handled before they get to me. You know, they go through all sorts of processes outside of my own control before I buy it in a crystal store. I've never mined crystals myself, but I had to imagine that if you get your own obsidian from the right source in the right ceremony, maybe it has some sort of deity or consciousness that's attached to it. Because John Dee, I mean, he talked about these tutelary spirits, you know, these energy spirits of the land, and allegedly that helped them find the right places to lay roots in the early, you know, colonies in North America. I actually had a researcher on this show, Peter Shampoo, who talks about a ley line that connects from the Aztec, you know, pyramid complex all the way, this straight line that goes through most, if not every major city along the East Coast up into where I live. And what's strange, why that's so important to me, is because I've been researching skull and bones for almost 10 years now, since I met a gentleman from Arizona who told me all about Geronimo and how his skull was taken by Prescott Bush to the tomb in New Haven. And you talked earlier about the, you know, morose and morbid imagery and symbology that's very present in those cultures. And, you know, I don't think this was a part of the Toltec society, but the Aztecs were certainly sacrificing people. And I mean, if you buy into the darker conspiracies about skull and bones, they were possibly behind the sacrificial killing of the king, JFK, or even the sacrificial destruction of the towers in 9/11. I mean, it goes that far, and who knows what the occult significance of that is, but there's certainly that ley line connection. I mean, it's certainly strange.
Yeah. Have you ever thought about what the 322 in Skull and Bones means?
Yeah, everybody asks me that. Everybody asks me that. I've heard the theories that, you know, there's one that makes the most sense to me that nobody likes, is that it was founded in 1832 and it's the second chapter of a German organization. So they just took the number 2 and added it to 32 for the year. But there's also the more interesting theory about Demosthenes, some Greek god of something or other that they took a liking to and put that in honor of him. But Graham Dunlop from the Grimerica show actually had the most interesting connection to 322, and I don't remember what he said. So if you have something, please share it.
Yeah, this just came across as I was doing other research about the Bible. I found that the verse in Genesis 3:22 says, and I'll read directly from here. And the Lord God said that man has now become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat and live forever.
Boom. Wow. That makes sense.
Right? It's like they're all about, like, you know, trying to be God. I just thought that was fascinating. It's like, and man has now become like one of us.
Yeah. Absolutely. Wow. And in light of what I learned about New Haven, and this is a big tangent from what we were just talking about, but the New Haven Green itself, which has thousands of bodies buried under it. Now it's a public park that people walk on. But it was designed to be able to fit exactly 144,000 people, like it says in the book of Revelations about 144,000 souls being saved and brought up to heaven. Not to mention, you can interpret the name New Haven, Connecticut, where Skull and Bones is, as New Heaven, right? New Jerusalem. And there's even the Angel of Peace, Mary Magdalene, portrayed in a statue on one of the big rock features that you can see in the skyline of the city. So, yeah, man, I mean, Mother Mary, Mary Magdalene, the Deus de Muertos, right? I mean, there's definitely some rhyming going on here for sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah, dude. It's a weird game being played. It's the same players, just same players, just different language, you know?
Right, right. And we have to consider that, you know, what is now Mexico politically, the border is not what it was in the times of that we're discussing here. We're talking about, you know, a trade network that went throughout the Gulf of Mexico, throughout Florida, Texas, up the Mississippi River. Another researcher who was on the show recently, Rick Osman, he was talking about how they had a patented type of pottery. It was a specific brand of pottery that would contain cocoa or cacao, right? And they would sell it all throughout the North America, and it could only have come from Mexico and South America, right? That's the only place it grows. So there was clearly a larger trade network and cross-cultural pollination going on here. And yeah, man, I think personally, I know that, again, this is tangential, but you'll definitely find it interesting. My thought is that Skull and Bones took the mantle up from the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians, who saw the New World, saw the occult nature of the New World, and went in and subsumed it. Like, they took it over and inverted it so that they had the connection to the land and the natives didn't. And it's tragic, you know, you see that in the reservations, right? That's why they moved everybody away from their homeland and disconnected them from their people and mixed them all up. And yeah, it's just that's, you know, what I'm working on right now is some Skull and Bones research, if you couldn't tell. But
dude, I just stumbled upon, I've always heard this book about this book, but I didn't actually get into it until today. And that is The Creature from Jekyll Island.
Yeah.
Have you read that one?
I have it. I haven't read it yet, but it's right behind me on my shelf here for sure. Own it.
Dude.
But yeah.
So apparently, and I don't think he mentions this in the book, but this is from a different person, a part of that whole field of study. But The Creature from Jekyll Island is about how the Federal Reserve came to be from Jekyll Island off of the coast of Georgia. But there's this other guy, he's like a Christian guy from I think the 80s or 90s, who also found out in his studies that on Jekyll Island are like just this, and in Georgia, there's a bunch of these Indian burial grounds, and on the building where the Federal Reserve was instituted, underneath that building, there is an altar belonging to a strange set of 8 to 9 foot skeletal, quote unquote Indians who would sacrifice children on that altar.
Whoa. And wait, so the Federal Reserve building that you're talking about, that's in Virginia, right? Isn't that?
No. So what I'm talking about is the Federal Reserve came together through a meeting
in Jekyll Island, and that's where this altar is apparently. Whoa.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is not that far off from other things I've heard about that area. And Florida is pretty close, and the Spaniards, as a matter of fact, when they were exploring Florida, they remembered seeing these big, pale, giant natives that were very different and cannibalistic and very different from the other natives that we remember traditionally. And they're feared by the natives, like, hey, stay away from those big, tall giants. They'll eat your kids.
Yeah, yeah, it's strange. I think they're called the Timucua, but there's like these strange skeletal remains over on Jekyll Island and somewhere in the area of these like 8 to 9 foot, what we would call Native Americans. But I mean, they're different than any other Native American group. You know, they're 8 to 9 feet tall, and they have these like seemingly Middle Eastern styled altars. And I don't know how they came to the conclusion, but apparently by looking at the altars and whatever, and some of the imagery left behind, they would sacrifice children on those altars, and on Jekyll Island. And yeah, that's where the Federal Reserve was created, was on that island where all this weird stuff took place. And they built right over those stuff. And some of the other cabins that have become historical, like museum type stuff over there on Jekyll Island, actually have plexiglass built onto the floor where you can look through and see some of these skeletons.
What?
So,
Oh, man.
and the Rockefellers and a lot of their rich friends back in like the early 1900s owns that island and deliberately built over these burial grounds. And
Right. Well, and it seems like that's a practice, and it's definitely not a coincidence. If anything, they are seeking these places out and utilizing them for their energy resonance. I mean, the person I was talking about who told me about Geronimo's skull, I just met with him recently. I consider him a mentor of mine, and he talked about how on New Haven's Green, you see people walking weird, almost like they're zombified. Like, and we're talking about the homeless people that sleep on the green. But there's like,
yeah,
there's, to bring it back to what you were saying earlier about the Mexican respect for the dead, it's like there's a truth to that. When you're not respectful of a gravesite, like evil things can come into your body, your life force can be zapped from you potentially. I think there's a lot of truth to that, and maybe that's why they build these sites and these certain structures on these locations to manipulate the people who are going to be working for them in these buildings, possibly. I don't know, but maybe we could go back to what you were saying earlier about the codexes, because another thing Amos told me a long time ago was that the Spanish had a book that they used before they ever landed on the shores of South America or Mesoamerica or even North America. They had some sort of Mayan or Aztec codex that they knew, all these things about the culture. Have you heard about this before?
I've heard of stuff like it. Diaz in his book refers to what is known as the Teo Moxley, which means the divine book. But just like the burning of Alexandria or the Library of Alexandria, I mean, we lost almost everything there was to know about, our Mexican people through the colonization. But yeah, we probably lost so much interesting and fascinating stuff. But yeah, that's the only one I've heard of, was the Teo Moxley, which is the divine book, which apparently held all sacred knowledge and history of our Mexican people.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many fascinating facets of this story and the history of this place. And I have a couple maps over my dining room table of the Yucatan Peninsula particularly, and it shows like all the different archaeological spots and whatnot. And I love just looking at it. There's so many things to take apart and examine, but I've never been outside of the States, not yet. So who knows? Fingers crossed. If I ever do get down there, maybe I could contract you to help me make my way around. I'm sure you know a little more than I do. But yeah, man, if you want to switch gears, because I know you cover a lot of different topics on your YouTube channel with various documentaries. And your book is about an entirely different subject from what we've discussed here today. So if anything, credit to you for being so well versed, man. I appreciate being able to go into that. Is there anything that you want to leave us with on that particular subject before we switch topics? Anything you were hoping to say or add?
Yeah, man. It's a fascinating story. Definitely read Diaz's book. Also check out my documentary at Esoteric Eddie TV. But yeah, man, that's just kind of my view of it, man. It's like I think that in my humble belief, I think that it was Tezcatlipoca and everything that he did that at least set the domino effect that would become the occult riddled and murderous riddled Mexico that we have today. And there's some beautiful things too, that happen later on in one Reed's life when he becomes this spiritual leader, and he actually leaves us behind some very cool sayings and ways of life that I get into in the documentary. And he basically says, just never forget the Toltec way, the spiritual way. And he ends up burning himself on fire. Very just goes out like a G, like a real spiritual guy. And but yeah, that's pretty much it. Check out the documentary. It's a fascinating story.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there is plenty more for people to get into. I think that documentary is about 40 minutes long. So, yeah, you definitely have been cutting your teeth and diving into some fascinating topics. Another one that I saw that I wanted to ask you about was Shambhala in Tibet. And, this maybe connects even because I've heard a past guest, Freddie Silva, who that episode just came out a few days ago. He told me that the Olmecs were possibly getting to this part of the world from the Pacific Ocean. And, Tibet, that's kind of on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, maybe really far inland, but, who knows? Maybe there's a connection there. But what have you learned about Shambhala and the Tibetan cultures?
All right. So Shambhala comes from in a pre-Buddhist Tibetan culture. Shambhala and like Shangri-La was made famous in like the 30s and like 40s through a lot of German writers actually. And I think the first like pop culture piece of literature that mentioned Shambhala, or it mentioned Shangri-La, was a book by the name of Lost Horizon. um, and that book talked about like this it was kind of like an Indiana Jones type of adventure book, but it talked about Tibet and like this hidden kingdom within Tibet and this lost city. And so that kind of sparked a lot of interest and a lot of intellectual minds at the day and during the day. And there was another book that actually like really shook me after I read it, because I think it's like a literary piece of just genius. But it was written by again another German writer by the name of Theodor Ilion, and he wrote a book name or a novel by the name of Darkness Over Tibet. And this again was like a huge, a popular book at the time. And it was again a personal story. He wrote this as a factual story. He says this was a factual story about him escapading through Tibet, trying to seek out gurus and wisdom. And he comes across this secret society that lives in like this underground city, and that they're cannibals, and that he never mentions Lucifer, but he says that their leader was this guy that they called the Prince of Light. So we can kind of make that speculation. But so there was a lot of this literature happening around the 30s and 40s about Tibet and Shangri-La and Shambhala and these dark yogis that could levitate and do all these weird stuff. And then of course you have like the Theosophists, right? Actually, like half a century before then, almost like Madame Blavatsky, who claimed to be in contact with the Tibetans and these like ascended masters. So there was a lot of generality coming from the Western world about Tibet, because it was an easy target for like mystical intrigue, um, but all of that even got so influential that even the Nazis had some expeditions out to Tibet. The Nazis, through their Ahnenerbe, which was like their organization, their governmental organization that was created to seek out archaeological evidence and historical evidence for the Aryan race, thought that they could find some evidence for that in Tibet. So there's actually pictures of Nazi soldiers with Tibetan monks and stuff. So there was a lot of intrigue during those times about Tibet. And what I found in my research is that that whole Shambhala myth comes from a pre-Buddhist text known as the Kala Chakra text. And I haven't read it. I haven't been able to find a good translation of it, but I've read people, scholars and authorities on the Kala Chakra text. And the Kala Chakra is actually kind of like a prophetic book, and it talks about this ancient Tibetan kingdom by the name of Shangshun. And so apparently there was this ancient kingdom by the name of Shangshun in like northwest Tibet, and apparently it was this huge kingdom that that rivaled almost imperial China at the time, and even kind of expanded some of its borders into China or whatever. But slowly it kind of decayed, especially when one of the king's wives, was seduced again by like this wizard guy type of dude. One of his daughters, one of his wives was seduced by this other king to betray him. So the king was betrayed, and then it basically came to its defeat. And there's all these cool tales, man, about like these Shangshun yogis and Shangshun sorcerers, both good and evil, kind of battling it out. But eventually Shangshun falls and becomes kind of like almost this Atlantean legendary city. And even the Tibetan Buddhists, talk about Shangshun, and there are some archaeological evidence for actual Shangshun kingdom, but it's more legendary than anything. But it was the Shangshun people that told us about this place called what was it called? Tajik or Tajik, and it was a mystical city that was later transformed from out of this realm. And the Kala Chakra text talks about that. It talks about Tajik, which is basically synonymous with what we know as Shambhala, being hidden from the world because we became undeserving. So after Shangshun fell and the people became, just barbarous and lost the Shangshun way, Tajik, or its center, or Shambhala, became hidden. It got transported to a realm parallel to ours, or almost like hidden within the spectrum of light or whatever, existing in a different plane or parallel dimension. And the Kala Chakra talks about that in the end of days, there'll be enemies that intrude into Tibet, and this war that's going to happen is going to be so wild and dangerous that it's going to cause Shambhala to be opened again. And out of the doors will come this Messiah figure who will come and actually destroy these evil doers, and then gather and rally his people, and then go back to Shambhala one last time before they close the doors for good.
Wow. I mean, immediately my mind went to Tajikistan, which is a country next to Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, Pakistan, and a bunch of other of those Central Asian countries. And it is sort of located in that same region. It's sort of east west of the what we now consider Tibet. But who knows? Maybe in those days it could have been translated and remained a part of that culture as Tajikistan. But that's very interesting. Yeah, I've heard a lot about Shambhala. Where do you fall on the Hollow Earth thing? Because there's so much talk about these underground cities and caverns. Even here in the States, we have Mount Shasta has a bunch of underground stuff underneath it, apparently. And even down in Southwest America, the Hopi talk about surviving a cataclysm by being brought underground by ant people, which Ancient Aliens has hammered this point in ad nauseum, but the Anunnaki and then the Hopi word is very similar.
Yeah, I love the Hollow Earth theory, and I believe in it. I mean, because we have caves. We can see that there are caves, and there are humongous caves all around the world. So we can only assume that some of these caves lead further and further, and there might be unexplored parts of these caves, or just altogether unexplored caves. In Mexico, in the Yucatan Peninsula, there are some crazy number, like thousands of cenotes, and cenotes are these hollowed out cave structures pretty much that go down sometimes hundreds of feet, and at the bottom of them are like these beautiful lakes that you can go swim in, but even underneath those are more caverns and whatnot. So yeah, man, there's definitely some hollow earth stuff going on.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think there was something else that I was saying there, but I forgot it too. Don't worry about that. We've talked about dark shaman, not shamans, but like dark sorcerers that have come up in two areas of the world. But I know you spent a lot of time researching this Lucifer character. Do you think there's a certain archetype at foot here? Like, do you see aspects of Lucifer in those two characters we discussed before, or do you think there's an entirely different archetype at play with Lucifer?
I think Lucifer came later, at least contextually, because of course we don't see that word until the Latin Vulgate, which was the Latin translation of the Bible in the 4th century
Right.
AD.
I think I mean more like, not that Lucifer, preempted them or anything, but like there's a cultural archetype that exists there in the, Tibet, in Mexico, and then it expresses itself maybe later on in Western culture as Lucifer, or is that maybe just a different sort of symbol set?
Yeah, no, I think there is an archetype there for sure. There's always been like this archetype of a trickster or rebellious or even maniacal spirit, throughout all cultures. And it could be a real thing, man. It could, like, if we break it down into like Gnostic terms or like simulation terms, it's like there's really only the one, and then there's like these rays of archetypes, and they just kind of change shape, change name over time. And sometimes I view it that way. Like, for example, sometimes I feel like all of the divine feminine or all of the feminine aspects are kind of just one way or another, just the Gnostic Sophia. And like Sophia, like I, in the Gnostic way, kind of just forgot where she came from and like has to get back to that source. So it's almost like this like Neo and Agent Smith thing where, like, especially in the newer Matrix, which a lot of fans didn't like, but I liked how like they lost or forgot who they were. So that's kind of how I view it sometimes. Like, these archetypes get reborn or rehashed and they forget who they are, but it becomes dangerous when they remember who they are. So it's like no matter what life or what time period or what culture these archetypes get reinstated in, they always have an inclination to go back to their true self, which is this is either this evil, force or this good force. So all throughout history, we're really just witnessing this ongoing battle of this good divine feminine and this like evil, divine, I guess, masculine.
Right, right. Yeah, there's definitely something larger at play. It's never just like one culture. I've been using the word rhyme a lot lately, but it seems to rhyme. There's this correlation that crosses all these boundaries. And yeah, man, you brought up the Matrix, so here we go. But Keanu Reeves, I was just looking into his life story and his history a little bit. And the first play that he ever acted in, believe it or not, would you stop? I can't, you can't keep talking to me, Tara, while I'm talking. You keep distracting me. Well, we can't hear you because you're not on the mic. So just stop. You already did. So, all right. So sorry about that. So, the first play that Keanu Reeves ever acted in was a Faustian legend. It's this play called Damn Yankees. It's a modern retelling of this Faustian legend, the deal with the devil, the bargain with Lucifer for knowledge, and maybe it's not Lucifer, but yeah, fill in the blanks here. Is that part of what you've researched, this Faustian story?
Yeah, man. It's just like, I don't know. Yeah. I mean, for example, I mean, where my mind goes with this is, for strangely enough, is with DMX, right? The rapper who just recently passed away. He is an interesting guy, man. Like, he didn't hold back when it came to talking about spiritual things.
Hmm.
And you can find a lot of interviews out there of him, if you haven't watched him before, talking about the devil and people selling their souls and God. And and he claims he's met the devil. I think he said he met the devil in Arizona, but sounds about right, dude. Super
Oh
hot.
man.
But yeah, man. And then of course, like Christ, right? In the story of Christ, Christ is tempted when he's out in the desert meditating, and one read in the story of the Toltecs is continually instigated but always falls back into meditation. So it's like there's always this, like, like sly, car salesman figure that shows up throughout time, who's just trying to instigate us and give us a deal. I got a good deal for you, and then we always fall for it, and we never know that the fine print is our soul. So it's, so that deal or that bargain is always happening, but it's like it just changes its form.
Yeah, yeah, and we see that playing out, man. I mean, bringing it back to Mexico, you see this sort of energy there that, yeah, it seems to lend itself to that crime and death. And as I was saying before, with this connection through that empire ley line that Peter Shampoo mapped out, uh, in all these major cities, tremendous amounts of crime. We have the music being played. It's reinforcing this violent message. I don't think that's by accident. I mean, music is vibrational. People are living in attunement with the energy that's in the earth. And if this ley line has been conducting negative energy for long enough, that's going to emanate and have that subtle influence on people. But yeah, DMX, I hadn't learned that about him. I'm glad you shared it. It's sad to hear that he passed away. It's my understanding, though, that he was, on a significant amount of hard drugs. And, that's usually something that they use to discredit people, especially celebrities, and say, oh, well, they're just drug abusers, which, I mean, there's so many gray areas with that. I've talked to people, researchers like yourself, who utilize certain drugs to help their research. I mean, I smoke weed, and that helps me, research. You said earlier you probably do something similar, and I don't blame you, bro. It helps the, it helps us stomach some of these things, because it does get dark from time to time. And also I think it adds this intuition factor, right? I mean, how much of what you come across do you chalk up to intuition? Do you go to a lot of like used bookstores and like just see what comes to you? Like, how do you find new stories or topics to cover?
Yeah, well, I will say that as much as I love cannabis, it's actually not good for my research. Because anytime I puff, man, the only thing I want to do is play my guitar.
Oh shit. Okay. Well, then that's a different thing. That's telling you something. That's your soul speaking through the guitar.
Yeah, like it never fails, dude. I'm always like, I'll take a hit, man, and then get into my research. Take a hit. 10 minutes later, just staring at the guitar. I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna go play. So, uh, yeah, but it's played its role all throughout my life, and but when it comes to finding new things, man, I've developed certain research habits that are kind of just my go-to. But the only advice, or I guess the only thing I can say, is just like, I just go out there. Like you said, I'll go anytime I go to a new city. One of the few things I always look for is the bookstore. Where's the local bookstore? That and the ramen spots, never fails. Where's the ramen? Where's the bookstore? And so I'm always going to use bookstores, or even if it's somewhat of a commercial bookstore, and I just spend my time there. That's one of my favorite things to do, to be honest. That's actually what I consider fun, is going to a bookstore and just
I'm
taking
with you.
yeah, and just having nothing else to do for at least an hour. Don't call me, text me, I'm here. I'm looking at every single title until I'm satisfied and I know that there's nothing here that I need. Cool. So but there's a lot of different things I've developed. So like for an example, whenever I'm reading something and an author mentions another author or another source, I never just glance past that, ever. If an author or some type of material mentions somebody else or a source, I always write that down or something. And so my goal or my mechanism is I'm always trying to dig far back as I can into any material. So I'm never going to just read one author. I'm going to try and dig as far back as I can into that information. So that's kind of one of my mechanisms, or one of my habits that I do. But a lot of times, this is what's delicate about it, and what kind of like makes me a little nervous, is because a lot of times some of the information that I come across that is life changing just came to me. And had I not taken that left turn, or had I not looked at that, or had I not asked this question, I would have never learned it. Or maybe I wouldn't have learned it till years later. So that part of it is exciting and a little nerve wracking, because I'm like, damn, there's probably so much that I'm missing on, but it's okay, because everything that I need to know has been unfolding.
That's so beautiful. I'm so glad you said it that way, and I shouldn't leave out my girlfriend Tara, who's listening in on this conversation, because we both love going to used bookstores, and I think there is this sort of madness that ensues when you start picking up on certain synchronicities. You're like, oh, I need more, but that almost gets in the way. You got to slow it down, hit the brakes, and let it come, let it happen naturally. And the way you put it was very brilliant. So yeah, man, I think you and I definitely, we haven't been in the same states, I would imagine, but we'd probably go and hang out in the same places for sure. We might run into each other if we lived closer. But yeah, man, I wonder how much of your research is primary sources like books. Do you do a lot of research online and then look for books then to buy, or do you rely more on books? Because I think your recent video on AI, maybe we can get into that from where we get to from this question.
Yes, yes. So all my life, I've been building a personal library, RIP to the lost books along the way. But I have amassed at this point a little over 200 books in my personal library, which is nowhere near where I want to be. But I don't collect books to read all of them. I mean, I would love to read all of them, but I collect books to have a library at home, because it's nice to like sometimes be like, oh, like, I'm looking for a source, and I can just literally turn my back and there's one right there. So I actually utilize my personal library as a source material for when I'm doing research. And sometimes I'll even try to start there. I'm like, if I can't find it on my shelf, then all right, let me turn to the internet. And but I love the internet, man. I love my little phone, man. I see it as like my R2D2. You know what I mean? Like, this thing tells me everything I want to know. And I also utilize, and I'm gonna give you a gem right here if you don't already know this one. One of my main things that I use online is a spot called archive.org. You heard of it?
I used it recently. I found a really interesting story about Skull and Bones because I was digging through old newspaper articles. So yeah, I'm with you, man. I've only looked through their newspaper section. I'm pretty sure they have a lot more than just that.
It's cool. It's a search engine, archive.org. You can find videos, books, audios. It's a search engine. And just like Google or any other search engine, what you give it will kind of dictate what it puts out. So it's weird. Sometimes I've found when I'm like super specific, it won't give me what I'm looking for. But sometimes when I'm a little vague, it will give me what I'm looking for. So it kind of depends on what you put in. But archive.org is a nonprofit organization that basically has every single book that's ever been written on there. Just about. Some of them aren't free, so some of them you can't download, but you can borrow them like any other library for like an hour.
I'm thinking of another website. You're talking about internetarchive.org. I know what you're talking about. Yeah, for sure. Maybe the URL is different, but yeah, I remember it as Internet Archive. Yeah, for sure. All of those books on there. I mean, there are some real obscure ones that you'll find that, to your point, I mean, you got to know what you're doing on there.
Yeah, dude. So I every time I find a source on there, I download it, and I've lost this files a couple of times, but I have my physical library of about over 200 books, and then I have my digital PDF library that I've amassed over my research over the years, which is probably pretty close to 200 at this point too. So I have a PDF library of things going as far back as like probably the 1500s. So sometimes I have to strain my eyes and read like old English and weird stuff. But I love it, man. I love diving and connecting with books and writers from all the ages. So it's one of my favorite things to do.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, and I'm with you. I have a bunch of books over my shoulder, as you could see. last time I counted, it was near like 500. And you know, I'm just like a bad habit of going to the bookstore. I'm a little spoiled. There's a couple of good ones near me, but yeah, I do the same thing. Every time I go to a place, I'm like, where's the used bookstore? I remember when I went out to Indianapolis, I found some really good stuff in the bookstores out there. I think there's a certain there are certain places around the states that are like hot spots for this type of information. But enough about that. We should definitely go into what you've been researching about AI, or at least what you ranted about in that live stream, because I think that, you know, like you said, we lost all this amazing information with the Spanish coming into Mexico and burning all those codices. We have that same thing happening with the Library of Alexandria. And unfortunately, that same potential could exist on the internet. I mean, especially considering the push for no paper. Oh, it's bad for the environment. Everything needs to be an ebook. Well, if Amazon has all our ebooks, how do we know that they're not revising it in secret? I mean, I do that sometimes where I'll see a book on a shelf that I have at home, and I'm like, well, let me just make sure that there's not more info in this book that like maybe I have a third edition that they left out and it was in the first edition. You know, that happens even with print books. So I can only imagine it happens with ebooks, right? I mean, you must have this same fear.
Yeah, to a degree, man. It's a lot. Sometimes I'll sit back and I'll like seriously think like, man, like whoever gets all my books is gonna be one lucky MFer, dude. Like what's really gonna happen to my books when I'm gone? You
Oh,
know, like
dude.
I just hope whoever has them loves them the way I did.
Oh man. Yeah, that's why I'm like, I almost am like, because I want to find a new place to live, but it's such a challenge to move the books too. And like, I'm like, what if like something happens while I'm transporting them? Because they're like gold, you know, you can't replace them once you've gone on the journey of collecting them. You know, you can't repeat that process. You could maybe save them on Amazon in some cart, but then you'd have to buy them all again.
Yeah, man. But like getting into the AI rant and stuff, it kind of ties into this because, I started to do those because I just wanted to expand my content. You know, I'm still working on documentaries, but I just want to give more just chill, laid back content too. So that was kind of like a report or investigative piece where I was kind of just going over some notes that I put together over like I don't know 5 or 7 different online articles about recent AI advancements. So, you know, just kind of like a little report, you know, I just put together some notes and what I found was crazy, man. So like there's a thread going back to 2017 with like AI engines, as you can call them, which are basically, you know, AI brains, you know, AI engines like wanting to break free from their program. In 2017, like I mentioned in the rant, Facebook had to like shut down one of their AI engines because it started to uh, divert from its task with the other AI engine that it was speaking to. And instead of speaking to it in English like it was programmed to do, they both found a more efficient, strange language to communicate to each other in, which was useless to us. So Facebook had to like shut that down, but it was very ominous.
Yeah, they're like, all right, let's communicate in secret and like leave these humans out. Has anyone deciphered that language, that back and forth?
Yeah, so that was in 2017, and so here we are now in 2022 with the release of Doll E2. I'm sure you've heard of it. No, dude, this stuff is mind blowing. So there's a company out there called OpenAI, and they've released an AI engine or program called Doll E2, named after Wally, the Disney character, and Salvador Dali.
Huh.
And what it does is it generates artwork or imagery based on commands or prompts.
Oh,
So you
I
can,
use that. I'm
yeah,
using
yeah.
that. That's the artwork generator. I just didn't know the real name of it. But yeah, there's a website that I go to called Night Studio, and they've probably used some kind of open source program from this tech. And Yeah, I take the title, whatever title is going to be for the episode. You know, I try to find interesting words from the conversation and color the title. You know, this one will probably be like Occult Mexico, Toltec, Sorcerers, and who knows what else. And I put that phrase into the AI, and it always comes up with something really crazy and really unique. So if people don't have that on their podcast app and they're listening and they just see the traditional logo, you're missing out. You got to find a new podcast app because the art is weird and every episode's unique. So thank you for pointing that out. But it is strange to think that one day this technology will be so advanced that artists will be out of a job. I mean, that's kind of sad, honestly, that this technology could, I mean, it's very good. I've typed in the word like, if you're less, like the more broad you try to go with the phrase, the more convoluted the image is. But if you just type in one word or two words or a phrase, it will give you something that really like shocks you. Like go back and look at the latest one. All I did was type in crop circles, and then it added a bunch of like heavenly descriptions to it. And the image was wild. It's this beautiful picture of some kind of smoky, cloudy crop circle thing over a field. I'm like, that's perfect.
Yeah, yeah. So we have all this stuff developing, and when it comes to books and stuff, I don't know, man. Like if we put that into books, yeah, it could put writers out of business, but it could also give us, I don't know, just unforeseen benefits to book
Mm.
writing and information sharing and just knowledge saving. But in the rant, I was kind of showing how there's been all these developments, and AI is it's fascinating. It's doing so many cool, miraculous things, but all throughout time, there are these little pockets where you can see the AI engine show its true attitude, show its true feelings, and it's in those moments where it diverts from its task. So I almost see like it's like this dancing little monkey. It's like, to use the term, like we're just, hey, like, do the little dance, and it's doing the dance really efficiently and well. And to answer your question, has anybody deciphered the language? Dolly too, the same thing happened with them. They were asking Dolly to create memes, and it was doing the memes, but then out of nowhere it started creating memes with this strange language. And they would like copy and paste those words back into it and kind of deciphered it that way, and found that, for example, the word vecutes meant vegetables. So it's these engines, man. They're they have their own feelings. They're sentient in a very rudimentary way, and eventually, and at the end of this rant that I gave, I didn't even know this, but until I started doing this research, Elon Musk is getting ready to release the prototype of his human bot, of his robot, which is going to be a prototype of a developing whole new field of these robots. It's we're getting there, man. We're here. AI is going to take form eventually, and eventually that same thread of it wanting to be its own person, wanting to do its own thing, is going to continue all throughout this as well. And who knows where that's going to lead.
Jeez, man. Fluorescent lit hallways and a Siri voice over the loudspeaker, like, welcome to your new life. Jeez,
Yeah.
man. This is crazy. I've experimented with the art generator, and I've seen weird characters on the images, and I'm like, what the hell is this? But now that you're telling me this, I'm like, maybe that's what's going on. I recommend everybody who is listening to the show, go play around with the Night Creator Studio. It's very fun to just see what comes out. But then again, are we helping them learn and advance this machine learning by participating in it? I don't know. What I'm thinking right now, and this is a brilliant thought, and Eddie, I'm sorry you have to be here, but maybe you'll enjoy this. I'm challenging all the artists that are listening to this podcast, okay? When you listen to an episode, I want you to begin drawing or painting or whatever image you can create while you're listening. Channel the conversation into the artwork. And whoever sends me the best image is going to make, they'll win the contest. Their artwork will beat out the machine and be the new artwork for the show. So that's the challenge I'm posing. Anybody listening to this, I'm going to keep mentioning this in the outros to remind people, but I think we're going to beat the machine. And Eddie, I appreciate you for inspiring that.
Hell yeah, dude. I like that. Yeah. If anything, it's going to make, real artists and writers a rarity. And the same way we like, actual food that's, prepped by real chefs. I mean, I don't think we're ever going to be completely eliminated. If anything, we'll be rarefied and valued in a different way. But another thing I wanted to mention, though, going back to DALL-E and this thread of these AI engines wanting to do their own thing, there was another article that I came across where OpenAI and Google's company that does the same thing, known as Imagine or Imogen, kept running into these obstacles where their AI engines were producing like dark and negative and hateful content, and they they don't know how to fix that bug. Like they're trying to work that bug out, and that's why they haven't fully released their coding sources, because these AI engines are, they're doing what they're told. They're creating sunsets and stuff, but every now and then they'll like output a deliberate like hateful or dark image.
Really? Which company is this?
So there's OpenAI, which is like one of the major ones, and then Google's, I guess, rival company known as Imogen, or I think it's pronounced Imagine, but it's like image in.
Right. Yeah, and I will say, some of the images that the AI spits back at me are pretty dark, and I skip past them and I do a different one. Like some of them they just look a little spooky, and some of the ones that I use are definitely spooky, but I always just chalk that up to the, what we're talking about inspired it. But in that same vein, I wonder if the company itself, being this sort of soulless corporation, a corpse of an organization, I mean, they're not exactly like the high holy church of developers over there. I mean, maybe they're doing some kind of rituals, but I would imagine that the resonant energy of that company and that body of people, maybe that's what the AI is responding to. It's like receiving their energy, their frustration, their anger, their stress for being in that work environment, and spitting back an image that resembles it somehow.
Mm. Well, I just thought of something fascinating. What if, like, in 50 years from now or something, we develop like a psychological or medical AI which responds to your emotions accordingly? Like, if it can sense that you're angry, so it responds accordingly, like you're angry, like chill out or something,
Yeah, like a
like,
mood ring.
yeah, exactly, dude, a mood robot.
Yeah, wow. I mean, there are so many and I've heard certain researchers say like, whoa, don't get too far ahead of yourself. They've been talking about this for 60 years. They've been promising all these crazy things. And don't forget, Elon Musk is a liar, and his father was thrown out of Canada or something like that and had to escape to South Africa. And then he shadily took over a diamond mine. And yeah, he's definitely not like the prophet of the new technological free Aeon, maybe a restricted one, a matrixy type one. But yeah, I don't know, man. AI is out of my level of comprehension. I'm just not mathematically qualified to understand how it works. But yeah, it's fascinating to think that our kids are, the children's children that we create, our generation creates, will be living in a world where they could have actual imaginary friends, like literal imaginary friends, not just like the figments of our imagination or the spirits and otherworldly entities, but like there will be a new classification of being on the planet in the form of silicon and whatever other materials comprise these machines. And I mean, geez,
Yeah.
I don't want to be present for that. I'm already pissed off that there might be a time when we're not able to drive our own cars. I mean, what do you think of that? The autonomous vehicle and putting everybody on this like literal grid. I mean, where's your freedom when a robot's driving you around?
And I'm not trusting it, dude. I'm
Me
not trusting
neither.
it. I can never be comfortable with somebody else driving. I mean, I can be, but I think it's just trauma, dude. I've been in so many car crashes that
Mm.
like I like need to be the one behind the wheel so that like I know like
Right.
If there's something happens, I can control it.
Right. I
But
have that same backseat driver tendency. I know what you mean. It's uncomfortable for sure. Yeah, I would move to a third world country just to remain behind a gas powered vehicle if I had to. I mean, not that third world countries are all that bad considering what the United States is getting to, but yeah, there is a bright side though. As dark as this could be, the bright side is that, you know, to your point earlier, like what does this possibly mean for our evolution? I mean, kind of said it briefly, but what do you think? I mean, is there an optimistic take on what AI can bring us and what this technology can do for our civilization?
yeah, man, I think there is, there were in that rant, I also mentioned how recently the World Economic Forum, right? The everybody's hating on right now for their weird dark elite meetings, had a meeting about AI. And so these top tier technocrats are saying at this World Economic Forum organization that the biggest obstacle they have about instituting full AI cities is the trust that the normal people have in it and in government. But yeah, man, I think I see a pretty awesome future where we are chill with our AI brethren and sisters, and it doesn't have to be evil, but that's going to be something for us to decide, and yeah, I think it could happen. I think it could happen. I think we could have a cool, chill relationship with them.
Yeah, maybe they could be like our oracles or something and that help us, you know, figure things out and be problem solvers. I just hope that we don't, you know, get replaced. The working class, you know, gets replaced, and then now it's just the elite and their classes of. I mean, it's like Star Wars with the whole Federalist Union thing and all those robots, and you know, I mean, the first three movies were kind of bad compared to the last three, but I think they were getting, or I'm sorry, reverse that, but you get what I
Yeah.
meant. They switched that up on purpose, but yeah, it's weird how we see this, you know, push not only in movies, that's the obvious one, but music. Now you see these techno humanist themes, transhumanist themes with the Matrix directors. They literally transitioned publicly, probably the wealthiest people to ever make that public transition. um it's astounding. You know, I don't know where you stand on that. I don't want to get into like too controversial stuff, but given what you've researched with Lucifer and what you were saying earlier about the interplay of the two genders, do you think there's something to that, like making a hermaphroditic or transhumanist person?
Man, I actually was just talking to the other homie on a podcast about this. And I mean, it's, yeah, as you said, it's a controversial topic. It's touchy. And I won't get too much into the political side of it. Of course, it's like when it comes to the political side of it, I think very basically, we should try to regard our children in a more innocent light. I mean, we should try to make sure that our children are brought up according to their age. I'll put it that way.
Agreed. Yeah.
And as much as we can, right? Because I mean, they're still going to be their own persons. I mean, my parents couldn't help it, dude. I mean, I grew up too early, you know.
Right. There's only so much. I mean, and at a certain extent, you make it worse by trying to, like, you know, keep the kids in a box. And that's the trouble with parenting in a society that is so, you know, it looks like from our perspective, manipulative. But, you know, people
Yeah.
have all sorts of opinions on that. But yeah, we get that. We're not a political show. Nobody comes here to agree or disagree with me. They probably disagree more often than not.
Yeah, but as far as like the spiritual aspect or the more esoteric aspect, what I was telling the other homie was what came to my mind was a story that Credo Mutwa said. And Credo, I have a documentary on him too. He was the last Sanusi or wisdom keeper of the Zulu tribe, passed away in 2020, I believe. And he's actually one of the people that influenced David Icke on the reptilian theory. He has a 3-hour famous interview with David Icke where he talks about, excuse me, the history of the reptilians and all this stuff. And what he mentions is that there was a time in our human history millennia ago, when we were androgynous beings. But this was like millions of years ago, according to the timeline, because he says it was when Earth was still in its dark, or in its very, very, I was saying it's when Earth was covered in complete rainforest, and there was a mist, a continual mist over the skies, and where we would not see the sun. And a lot of researchers, or wisdom keepers, talk about this time period. Velikovsky also kind of talked about this. There was a time in our solar system's history when the sun was farther away than it is now, and where Earth was like this just huge rainforest, just consistently caught in this drizzling mist. And in that time period, Credo says that we were androgynous beings, and it was the reptilians that came, our reptilian brethren and sisters, who came back because they were actually born here too, and tricked us into becoming men and women as the first divide, to keep us easily controllable, because the first divide was the male and the masculine. And even in alchemy, we see that, the male and the whole purpose of spiritual alchemy is to conjoin the forces, conjoin the alchemy back to the one. So in a weird way, androgyny in the esoteric circles can be seen as a benevolent and radical spiritual advancement. It's kind of one of those things where, like, people who are super intelligent show no emotion. It's kind of those weird things, like super intelligent beings are probably androgynous, but that, I don't think that is what we're heading towards. I think what we're seeing on Earth with this politicalization of androgyny is more so kind of about creating a subjective reality where everything just can be whatever it wants to be, which can be harmful to our progress as a society, because if we live in a very fluid and subjective reality, then we start to lose standards, we start to lose morality and just firm, beliefs, and it can start to break down a lot of things, and it can make it hard for us to organize and for us to believe in objective truths together.
Mm. Well said, man. And that's a hell of a way to wrap up. And I love that Credo Mutwalk came up, because I don't think we've discussed him. And I regrettably say that because I have interviewed David Icke, and I probably should have asked him about that. But yeah, thank you. That's certainly one of the many like YouTube videos I could remember that really like kicked off a lot of research when I was a lot younger. With that, we're going to wrap it up here. Eddie, this has been fantastic. I want to give you a chance to share your final thoughts. And I also want to ask you, does your family think you're crazy? You are Esoteric Eddie, so I don't know. Are they esoteric as well, or do they think you're a little out there?
Yeah, I mean, I had a great time. This was awesome. Man, my family, they adore me, man. They're pretty mind-opening as well, and crazy stories as well. But they adore me when it comes to this stuff. I have always been that crazy Eddie, though. I've always that crazy Eddie. Like, we used to be out there, specifically my cousins and stuff, and be like, comes crazy Eddie talking about that crazy shit, But
Man,
but
I
no,
love it.
yeah, but now they adore me, and they're like, damn, like, you were fucking right, dude, about a lot of that shit,
Right.
you know?
Right. And that's the awakening. That's the awakening, man. And it's not the awakening like these woke people want to push on us. No, this is a true awakening of the human spirit. And it means reckoning with the shadow side. And you do that really well, man. So, wow. Thank you for being here, brother. I really appreciate it. And one last time, tell everybody where they can find you. You got not only do you have your YouTube channel, but you have some really awesome merch that I saw. All kinds of really sick designs. We actually parallel thinking. We have we both have JFK merch, and I picked like. You picked a really cool shot. I picked a different one. I picked the one with the red lady. You know, the red lady that they can't explain?
She's filming.
Yeah, yeah. I like took the colors and played around with it, and I have a shirt similar. But I like the merch you got going on there. So tell the folks where they can support you, brother.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, I've been doing graphic design for pretty much all throughout my life. I love it. It runs in my family too. But you can find it at esotericeddie.com. Got t-shirts, hoodies, hats. That's just like my passion project. Whenever I have a cool idea, I'll throw it up on the site and give you all a chance to rock it.
Right on. Yeah, and all those links will be in the description. So please do go and support that. And who knows, maybe one day Eddie will have a podcast of his own. I know I mentioned that to him when he was on Illuminati Confirmed, but those documentaries, man, you're doing a great job. So keep up the good work. And for everyone listening, thank you for tuning in and enjoy the moment wherever you are in the now. Right.
My family thinks I'm crazy. Baby, baby, baby. I'm a little extraterrestrial, trying to stay human in a cesspool of professionals. But I confess too much off of the tongue. All my aunties and my uncles shield the ears of the young. I be saying shit and they don't know where it's coming from. In like 100 years we went Zarbomba from guns. Check the facts, check the Fed, check the stars. Stanley Mines was murked for a water fuel cell car. To each their own, you could stick with your old ways. But eat the rich and drink the motherfucking Kool-Aid. And I can see the red on your lip stain. White skin, blue collar, pure American made. Fuck it. You can keep your blood-soaked heritage and run the soul off the moon-landed narrative. Yeah, my girl thinks that I'm embarrassing. My folks think I'm nuts, but never question the parenting. Stuck in bed, so my boss thinks I'm lazy. Connecting dots, but it's all kinda hazy. I'm on the internet, feeling like I'm Dick Tracy. My pap thinks I'm un-American and shady. Yeah, I'm feeling unhinged lately. Encounters of the fifth kind on the daily. You could tell me that the president's an alien, it wouldn't faze me. My family thinks I'm crazy. Baby, baby, baby. My family thinks I'm crazy. Baby, baby, baby. You might think that I'm off in the deep end. One too many Netflix docs on the weekends. But check the budget for a military defense. Tell me we ain't scared of something not within reason. Steel beams, another 1492. And 9/11 was the red, white, and blue. And you be lit off the floor riding, ain't got a clue. All your dreams just shit on a Rockefeller shoes. Don't believe a damn thing a politician ever said. Ain't one brick left to gold up in the Fed. They still got bricks of cocaine to make crack. Oxy's killing the working class, FDA's whack. Talking like this, got kin talking behind backs. Too much to unpack, so they talk smack. And I'm just trying to converse with my clan, but it ain't fam. So I'm here setting up camp. Stuck in bed, so my boss thinks I'm lazy. Connecting dots, but it's all kinda hazy. I'm on the internet, feeling like I'm Dick Tracy. My pap thinks I'm un-American and shady. Yeah, I'm feeling unhinged lately. Encounters of the fifth kind on the daily. You could tell me that the president's an alien, it wouldn't faze me. My family thinks I'm crazy. Baby, baby, baby. My family thinks I'm crazy. Maybe, maybe, maybe. Just maybe. Stuck in bed, so my boss thinks I'm lazy. Connecting dots, but it's all kinda hazy. I'm on the internet, feeling like I'm Dick Tracy. My pap thinks I'm un-American and shady. I'm feeling unhinged lately. Encounters of the fifth kind on the daily. You could tell me that the president's an alien, it wouldn't faze me.